"This is the mistake," my aunt said, lifting her wine glass toward me while the entire table laughed. And then a woman I had never seen before stood up across the room and said, "That's not true." The restaurant went dead silent. Even the pianist near the bar stopped playing. I was still standing beside the table because nobody had made room for me to sit down. 23 people packed into a private dining room for my grandmother's birthday, and somehow there still wasn't a chair for me. Typical. My cousin Bianca sat between my mother and grandmother, wearing a white silk dress that probably cost more than my rent. Everyone kept calling her the star of the family. My older brother Damien had spent the last hour talking about investments, while my uncle bragged about him like he'd invented money itself. And me. I'd walked in 10 minutes late after finishing a double shift at the rehab center, still smelling faintly like disinfectant and coffee, and the first thing Aunt Celeste said when she saw me was, "Well, the mistake finally made it. Not Vanessa. Not my niece. Not even she's here. The mistake. Like always." The worst part wasn't her saying it. It was how normal everyone acted afterward. My mother stared down at her plate. Damien smirked into his whiskey. Bianca gave me that fake little pity smile she used whenever people were cruel to me in public. Nobody said stop. Nobody ever did. I should have left then, I know that now. But when you spend your whole life trying to earn love from people who enjoy withholding it, you start accepting humiliation like it's an entrance fee. So I stayed. I stood there holding my purse while servers brought out another round of wine. Aunt Celeste leaned back in her chair dramatically and pointed toward me again. "You know," she told the guests beside her, "every family has one person they don't know what to do with." A few uncomfortable laughs. She was born, and suddenly everything went wrong after that. My chest tightened. I could actually feel people looking at me. Strangers, restaurant staff. Even the couple celebrating an anniversary at the table nearby had gone quiet. I looked toward my mother one last time. She still said nothing. Not one word. Then Aunt Celeste smiled and added, "But we keep her around anyway, charity work." Maury laughter. My face burned so hot, I thought I might cry right there in front of everyone. I looked down at the floor because that's what I always did when this happened. Disappear. Shrink. Wait for it to pass. But before I could step away, a chair scraped hard against the hardwood floor across the room. The sound cut through everything. I looked up. A woman around her late 50s stood beside one of the nearby tables. Elegant black dress, silver necklace, sharp posture, the kind of presence that makes people stop talking without even trying. She wasn't smiling. She was staring directly at my aunt. "That's not true," she said again. Nobody moved. Aunt Celeste blinked. "Excuse me." The woman stepped closer to our table slowly, eyes locked on my family like she recognized every single one of them. And suddenly, something strange happened. My grandmother looked terrified. Not confused. Not annoyed. Terrified. The woman stopped beside me. Close enough now that I could smell her perfume. She looked at me for a long second, and there was something in her expression I didn't understand. Pity. Anger. Recognition. Then she turned back toward my family and said quietly, "You people have absolutely no idea who she is." Damien stood up immediately. "I think you need to leave." But the woman ignored him completely. Instead, she looked straight at my mother. And my mother went pale. That's when I realized this woman wasn't mistaken. She knew them. Maybe worse. They knew her. The woman reached into her purse slowly, and my aunt's confident smile vanished instantly. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The woman reached into her purse slowly, and my aunt's confident smile vanished instantly. Not annoyance. Not irritation. Fear. Real fear. Aunt Celeste, Bianca said with a nervous laugh. Do you know her? Nobody answered. The woman pulled out an old photograph with bent corners and held it carefully between two fingers. My grandmother made a choking sound the second she saw it. Oh my God, she whispered. I stared at her. In my entire life, I had never seen my grandmother Ruth lose composure. She controlled every room she walked into. Holidays, funerals, birthdays, it didn't matter. She was always polished, always cold, always in charge. But now her hands were shaking. The stranger looked directly at her and said, You told me this would never happen again. The room felt smaller somehow. Damien stepped around the table aggressively. Okay, that's enough, who are you? The woman finally looked at him. Her expression hardened instantly. You must be Damien. Not you must be her brother. Not an introduction. An accusation. He stopped moving. That tiny hesitation lasted maybe half a second, but I noticed it. So did she. A waiter approached carefully, clearly unsure whether to interrupt. Is everything all right here? No, Aunt Celeste snapped too quickly. It is, this woman is harassing our family. The stranger let out a short laugh at that. Harassing, she repeated. That's interesting coming from you, Celeste. The way she said my aunt's name made my stomach tighten. She knew them personally. Maybe very personally. I looked toward my mother again. Elaine looked like she might faint. Her makeup suddenly seemed too pale against her skin, her wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her emotional about anything involving me. Then the stranger turned toward me again. Up close I noticed her eyes first, sharp grey eyes that studied my face like she was comparing me to someone else. And then she said something that made the hair on my arms rise. You look exactly like your father. The room exploded. Stop it, my mother said immediately. Damien slammed his hand against the table. You need to leave right now. But I barely heard either of them. Because nobody in my family talked about my father. Ever. Not his name. Not his life. Nothing. Growing up, I was told only two things about him. He ruined the family. And he abandoned us. That was it. Any question after that usually ended with someone telling me I was too sensitive or digging up old problems. When I was 12, I found a photo album missing an entire section of pages. When I asked my mother why, she told me some memories were better forgotten. Now this stranger was standing in front of everyone talking about him like he mattered. Like he was real. The woman glanced down at the photograph in her hand before offering it toward me. Aunt Celeste stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. Don't, she said sharply. Not to me. To the woman. And suddenly I understood something terrifying. This wasn't random. This woman hadn't stood up because she felt bad for me. She came here for a reason. My hands shook as I reached for the photograph. Before I could touch it, Damien grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt. Vanessa, he said quietly through clenched teeth, don't. I looked at him in shock. Then at the stranger. And for the first time in my life, someone looked back at me like I wasn't the family embarrassment. Like I was the center of something they were desperate to hide. The stranger's voice dropped low. She deserves to know what you people did. The sentence landed on the table like broken glass. Nobody moved. Damien was still gripping my wrist too tightly, his face calm in the way people get right before they lose control. Let go of her, the woman said. She's upsetting my grandmother, Damien replied evenly. No, the woman said, the truth is upsetting your grandmother. Grandmother Ruth suddenly pushed her chair back. Vivian. That name hit the table hard. The stranger looked at her without blinking. Hello, Ruth. Aunt Celeste closed her eyes briefly, like she already knew the night was collapsing. My pulse started hammering. Because this wasn't some random customer interfering out of sympathy. This woman had history with them. Deep history. And somehow it involved me. Damien finally released my wrist and stepped between me and the woman. Whatever game you think you're playing, he said quietly, you need to stop now. Vivian. That was her name. She tilted her head slightly. Still protecting yourself before anyone else, some things never change. Security, Aunt Celeste snapped toward the restaurant entrance. Now. But nobody came immediately. Most of the staff had frozen near the kitchen doors, openly staring. Even the nearby tables had gone silent. I realized with horror that people were recording on their phones. Bianca noticed too. Oh my God, she muttered, can everyone please stop filming? Nobody stopped. Vivian ignored all of them and held the photograph out toward me again. This time nobody blocked me. I took it carefully. The photo was old, faded around the edges. 4 people stood in front of a lake somewhere. A younger version of my mother. My grandmother. Vivian. And a man I recognized instantly, without ever having truly seen him before. My father. I stared at him in shock. Not because I remembered his face clearly, I didn't. But because I had his eyes. The same dark eyebrows. The same crooked half-smile. For years, my family talked about him like he was some disaster that happened to them, a shameful story nobody wanted repeated. But in this picture, he looked happy. Normal. Alive. And then I noticed something else. My mother was holding me. A baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. I looked up slowly. Where did you get this? Vivian answered without taking her eyes off my family. Your father gave it to me. The silence afterward felt dangerous. Damien laughed suddenly, but it sounded forced. This is insane. No, Vivian replied calmly. What's insane is spending 27 years convincing her she was unwanted. I felt my stomach drop. My mother stood up abruptly. Please, she whispered to Vivian, not here. That word hit me harder than yelling would have. Please. Not you're lying. Not leave us alone. Please. Vivian looked at her for a long moment. You had years to tell her yourself, Elaine. I was protecting my family. No, Vivian said sharply. You were protecting your secrets. Aunt Celeste slammed her wine glass down. Enough. The crack echoed across the room. Wine spilled across the white tablecloth like blood. You walk in here after all these years, Celeste hissed, and think you can destroy people's lives. Vivian's expression didn't change. I didn't destroy anything. Your family did that on its own. I looked around the table desperately, trying to understand what was happening. Nobody looked angry in the normal way. They looked exposed. Cornered. And underneath all of it was fear. Real fear. Bianca suddenly grabbed my arm gently. Vanessa, don't listen to this, she's manipulating you. I pulled away immediately. Manipulating me. After everything they'd said to me my entire life. I looked directly at my mother. Who is she? Elaine's lips parted but no words came out. Vivian answered instead. I worked with your father. Damien scoffed. You mean you helped him rob us? Vivian turned slowly toward him. And smiled. Not warmly. The kind of smile adults give children who don't realize they've just made a mistake. Your father never stole $1, she said to me. The room went still again. I felt something shift inside me. Small, but irreversible. Because for the first time in my life, someone had contradicted the story I'd been raised on. Not softened it. Not excused it. Contradicted it completely. My voice came out quieter than I expected. What are you talking about? Vivian looked at me carefully, almost like she was deciding how much to say. Then she reached back into her purse. Damien noticed instantly. Don't. She ignored him. My grandmother suddenly started crying softly into her napkin. That scared me more than anything else. Vivian pulled out a thick sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My name written across the front in faded blue ink. Vanessa. Not the mistake. Not some joke. Just my name. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Vivian placed the envelope carefully on the table in front of me. Your father left this for you, she said. I stared at it without breathing. My mother closed her eyes. And then Vivian delivered the sentence that changed everything. Your family made sure you never got it. Your family made sure you never got it. For a second, nobody at the table even breathed. I stared at the envelope like it might disappear if I looked away. My name was written across the front in neat blue handwriting. Not printed. Not typed. Written. By him. My father. My hands started shaking before I even touched it. Vanessa, my mother said quickly, standing up so fast her chair scraped against the floor, don't do this here. I looked at her. Actually looked at her. And suddenly, every moment from my childhood felt different. Every avoided question. Every time she changed the subject. Every birthday where nobody mentioned him. Every photo missing from albums. Every silence. You knew about this, I asked. Her eyes filled instantly. That answer was enough. A cold pressure spread through my chest. Vivian stepped back slightly, giving me space. Open it. Damien moved around the table immediately. No. His voice was sharp now, panicked. Not protective. Panicked. You don't even know if that's real, Bianca added quickly. Vivian laughed under her breath. Interesting, none of you are asking what's inside. But nobody answered her. Because they already knew. That realization hit me so hard I almost dropped the envelope. The entire restaurant felt distant suddenly, like the room had pulled underwater. I slid my finger carefully beneath the seal. My mother covered her mouth. Please, she whispered. The paper inside crackled softly as I unfolded it. The handwriting matched the envelope. Steady, careful, familiar in a way that made no sense. I started reading silently at first. Then my vision blurred. Vanessa, if you're reading this, then something happened before I could come back for you. My throat tightened immediately. Not abandoned you. Not left you. Come back for you. I kept reading. I need you to know one thing before anyone else tells you otherwise. You were never a mistake. A sharp sound escaped my mother's throat. I looked up instinctively. She was crying now. Not polite tears. Real cryings. Too late. Way too late. My eyes dropped back to the page. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Everything I did was to protect you. If they tell you I ran away, they're lying. If they tell you I betrayed the family, they're lying about that too. The room around me disappeared. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Across the table, Damien suddenly grabbed his drink and swallowed the rest in one motion. His hands weren't steady anymore. I kept reading. There are things happening inside this family you don't understand yet. And if anything happens to me, it came from inside that house. Inside that house. Not outside. Not strangers. Family. I looked up slowly. Everyone at the table looked terrified of one piece of paper. Not embarrassed. Terrified. What did you do? I whispered. No, Damien snapped immediately. You don't get to do this. Do what? I shot back. Read a letter. Vanessa, Bianca interrupted softly, trying to regain control of the situation. You're emotional right now. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because emotional was the word they used every time I reacted normally to being treated horribly. When I cried after being mocked at Christmas. When I got upset after Aunt Celeste introduced me to guests as the cautionary tale. when Damien told me nobody expected much from me anyway. I was always emotional. Never hurt. Never humiliated. Just emotional. I looked directly at Bianca. Did you know too? She froze. Tiny hesitation. But enough. Oh my God, I whispered. Vivian folded her arms. They built an entire version of reality around her. Aunt Celeste stood abruptly. That's enough. No, Vivian replied calmly, not even close. The restaurant manager finally approached nervously. Ladies and gentlemen, if there's an issue. There's no issue, Damien said quickly. There's fraud, Vivian corrected. The word slammed into the room. Even nearby diners reacted to that. The manager stopped talking immediately. Damien's face darkened. Careful. Vivian took one slow step toward him. No, she said quietly, you should have been careful. I looked between them. Somebody tell me what's happening. My voice cracked on the last word. Nobody from my family answered. Vivian did. Your father discovered financial fraud inside the family business years ago. Silence. He was preparing evidence. Another silence. Then suddenly money disappeared from company accounts, she continued, and somehow your father became the one blamed for it. I felt dizzy. No, Damien said instantly, that's a lie. Vivian ignored him completely. He was publicly accused of stealing from his own family, she said to me. His reputation collapsed within days. I remembered whispers growing up. Disgrace. Addict. Thief. Failure. Every insult attached to his name suddenly sounded rehearsed. Manufactured. My stomach turned. He didn't abandon you, Vanessa, Vivian said gently. He was trying to prove what really happened. The room exploded all at once. That is enough, Aunt Celeste shouted. You're insane, Bianca snapped. My mother started crying harder. But over all of them, I heard my grandmother's voice. Quiet. Broken. It was supposed to protect the company. Everyone froze. Including me. Grandmother Ruth looked down at the tablecloth like she hadn't meant to say it aloud. And for the first time in my life, I saw guilt on her face. Real guilt. I turned slowly toward her. What does that mean? Before she could answer, Damien suddenly lunged across the table toward the letter in my hands. Give me that, he shouted. The chair behind me crashed backward as I stumbled away. Gasps filled the restaurant. Security near the entrance started moving toward us fast. And over the chaos, my mother whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. My mother's voice barely rose above the noise in the restaurant, but I heard it clearly. And judging by the look on Vivian's face, so did she. Security rushed into the private dining room, just as Damien tried reaching for the letter again. Sir, step back, one of them ordered. Damien immediately straightened his jacket and tried to regain control of himself, but the damage was done. Half the restaurant had watched him nearly tackle me over a piece of paper. Over a letter from my dead father. I'm fine, I said automatically, though my hands were still shaking. No, you're not, Vivian said quietly. That hit harder than I expected. Because nobody in my family had ever said that before. Not when I cried. Not when I got bullied in school. Not when Aunt Celeste humiliated me in front of strangers. I was always expected to absorb pain quietly, so everyone else could stay comfortable. The manager approached carefully. Do we need to call the police? Yes, Vivian answered immediately. No, Damien snapped at the exact same time. The manager looked between them nervously. Vivian reached into her purse again and pulled out a slim leather folder. I'm an attorney, she said calmly, and I have documentation connected to financial crimes involving members of this family. Every ounce of color drained from Bianca's face. Aunt Celeste looked ready to explode. "This is unbelievable," she hissed. "You walk in here after 20 years trying to destroy us." "You destroyed yourselves," Vivian interrupted. My grandmother suddenly spoke again. "We never thought Adrian would go public." Silence. I turned toward her slowly. "Adrian. My father's name." She had never said it around me before. Not once. Even hearing it aloud felt wrong somehow, like uncovering something buried. Grandmother Ruth looked exhausted now, smaller somehow. "He gave us opportunities to fix it privately," she continued weakly. "He said if the money was returned, he wouldn't involve authorities." I stared at her in disbelief. "Money," I whispered. "What money?" Nobody answered immediately. And that silence told me everything. Vivian opened the folder and removed several copies of documents. Bank statements, transfer records, accounting reports. She laid them carefully across the table, while nearby guests openly watched. "This is what your father found," she said to me. Damien laughed harshly. "You think papers prove anything?" "No," Vivian replied. "The offshore accounts proved it." His expression changed instantly. Tiny shift. But enough. I saw it. So did everyone else. My pulse started racing again. "Damien," Bianca whispered nervously. "Don't," he shot back immediately. And there it was. Not confusion. Not outrage. Fear. I looked down at the papers spread across the table. I didn't fully understand the financial details, but certain words repeated constantly. Unauthorized transfers. Shell vendors. Foreign accounts. Missing funds. Then I saw dates. The transfers stopped 3 days before my father disappeared. A cold chill crawled up my spine. I looked at Damien's. He wouldn't look back at me anymore. Suddenly memories started rearranging themselves in my head. Damien buying a luxury condo at 26. My grandmother constantly praising him for saving the business. The way everyone treated him like untouchable royalty afterward. Meanwhile, my father became the villain. And I became the mistake. Not because of who I was. Because of who I belonged to. "Oh my God," I whispered. My mother started crying harder. "I didn't know what else to do," she said suddenly. I turned toward her sharply. "What does that mean?" Elaine pressed trembling fingers against her forehead. "Your father wanted to take you away." The room went still again. "What?" "He said the family was dangerous," she whispered. "He said once he exposed everything, none of us would survive the fallout." Vivian nodded slowly, because he was right. Aunt Celeste slammed her hand against the table. "Stop acting like he was innocent." "He was innocent of theft," Vivian replied coldly, "which is more than I can say for the rest of you." Damien stepped forward again, careful. Security moved immediately between him and Vivian. The entire situation felt seconds away from completely exploding. Bianca suddenly grabbed her purse. "We need to leave." "No," I said. My own voice surprised me. Everyone looked at me. For the first time in years, nobody interrupted. Nobody mocked me. Nobody dismissed me. I stepped closer to the table slowly, gripping my father's letter tightly in one hand. "You called me a mistake my entire life," I said quietly. "Why?" Nobody answered. I looked directly at Aunt Celeste. "You said I ruined everything just by being born." Celeste crossed her arms defensively. "You don't understand the pressure this family was under." "That's not an answer." Her jaw tightened. And finally, Grandmother Ruth broke. "You look too much like him," she whispered. The words punched the air out of my lungs. Nobody spoke. "You had his face," she continued shakily. "His eyes. Every time people looked at you, they asked questions." I felt sick. Not hated for something I did. Hated for reminding them of what they did. Vivian looked at me carefully. Your father fought them for years, Vanessa. My throat tightened painfully. He wanted to expose everything legally, quietly, but once he realized Damien altered company records, she paused. Things escalated. I looked toward my brother. Did you frame him? Damien's silence answered before he did. Then his face hardened again. You have no idea what was at stake, he said coldly. That company fed this entire family. You destroyed Dad's life. He was going to destroy ours first. The room erupted again. Bianca started crying. Aunt Celeste shouted at Damien to stop talking. My mother sat down heavily like her legs could no longer hold her up. And through all of it, Vivian stayed perfectly calm. Because unlike everyone else, she already knew how this story ended. Then she looked directly at Damien and delivered the sentence that changed the entire night. There's one thing you forgot. Damien froze. Vivian reached into her purse one final time and pulled out a small digital recorder. Adrian left a statement before he died, she said. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Vivian's eyes locked onto Damien's. He named the person responsible. Damien went pale instantly. And then Vivian added quietly, the police already have a copy. The police already have a copy. The sentence hit Damien harder than anything else that night. I saw it happen in real time. The confidence disappeared first. Then the anger. Then whatever lie he'd been preparing. For the first time since I'd known him, my brother looked afraid. Not socially uncomfortable. Not embarrassed. Afraid. What recording? Bianca whispered. Vivian never looked away from Damien, the one Adrian made 3 days before he died. My chest tightened at hearing my father's name spoken so naturally. Like he deserved to exist. Like he hadn't been erased. The restaurant doors opened again before anyone could respond. 2 police officers walked inside with the manager close behind them. Conversations throughout the restaurant stopped completely. One officer approached carefully. We received reports of a disturbance. Nobody answered immediately. Then Damien spoke too fast. This is a misunderstanding. Vivian calmly handed the officer a business card and the leather folder containing the documents. It's not, she said. The officer opened the folder slowly, scanning the first few pages. His expression changed almost immediately. I looked at my family. Aunt Celeste had gone completely pale. Bianca sat frozen in her chair, mascara streaking beneath her eyes. My mother looked hollow. And my grandmother. She looked old for the first time. Actually old. Like carrying this secret for decades had finally crushed whatever strength she had left. The officer looked toward Damien. Sir, we may need you to come with us. This is insane, Damien snapped. She has no proof. Vivian lifted the recorder slightly. Yes, she said, I do. The room felt frozen as she placed the recorder carefully onto the table. My pulse hammered inside my chest. Part of me didn't want to hear it. Because once I did, everything became real. Vivian looked at me gently. You should hear this. My hands shook as I picked up the recorder. Then I pressed play. Static crackled softly. A breath. And then my father's voice. I stopped breathing instantly. Today is October 17th, the recording said. If this reaches Vanessa, it means I failed to stop them in time. Tears hit my face immediately. Not because of what he said. Because of his voice. Real. Warmth. Human. Not the monster my family described. Not the disgrace they buried. Just my dad. Across the table, my mother started sobbing quietly. The recording continued. Damien altered the accounting records 6 months ago. Celeste discovered it first. Ruth wanted the situation handled privately to avoid scandal. I looked up slowly. Nobody denied it. Nobody even tried. My father's voice remained steady. I refused to sign the false reports. After that, they began preparing evidence against me instead. The officer listening nearby exchanged a look with his partner. My stomach twisted harder with every second. They think protecting the company matters more than the truth, my father continued. But if anything happens to me, Vanessa deserves to know I never abandoned her. I covered my mouth. The entire room blurred through tears. She was the best part of my life. A broken sound escaped my throat. Years believing I was unwanted. Too difficult. Too embarrassing. A burden people tolerated. And all along, he loved me. The recording crackled briefly before continuing again. Damien became desperate after I threatened to go to authorities. We fought 2 nights ago. He shoved me during the argument. Damien immediately shook his head. That's not what happened. But nobody was listening to him anymore. The recording kept playing. If something happens to me after this, it won't be accidental. Silence. Then the recording ended. Just like that. No dramatic music. No final speech. Only silence. Heavy, unbearable silence. One of the officers stepped toward Damien carefully. Sir, we need you to come with us. Damien looked around the room desperately. At Bianca. At Aunt Celeste. At my mother. Nobody moved to help him. Because they couldn't. The truth was finally bigger than the family. This family survives because of me, Damien snapped suddenly. You think any of you are innocent? Aunt Celeste looked away. My grandmother closed her eyes. And my mother whispered something that barely sounded human. We ruined him. That sentence shattered whatever was left of the illusion. The officers escorted Damien toward the exit, while nearby diners openly recorded everything. He looked back at me once before disappearing through the doors. Not apologetic. Not remorseful. Angry. Like somehow this was still my fault. And maybe that was the saddest part. Even now, he still needed me to carry the shame for him. The room slowly emptied after that. Bianca left first, humiliated and crying after her fiancé quietly walked out without her. Aunt Celeste tried speaking to the officers before realizing nobody cared about protecting the family reputation anymore. The recordings were already online. People at nearby tables were whispering, staring, judging. For once, none of that attention was aimed at me. Vivian stayed beside me while I sat there holding my father's letter. You knew all these years, I asked quietly. She nodded once. Your father asked me to protect evidence in case something happened to him. I swallowed hard. Why didn't you come sooner? Pain crossed her face. I tried. That answer hit deeper than I expected. Because suddenly I understood. Someone had stopped her. My mother. Elaine approached slowly a few minutes later. She looked destroyed. Not polished. Not composed. Just broken. I thought I was protecting you, she whispered. I stared at her for a long time. You protected them. She started crying again. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel responsible for comforting her. Weeks later, the scandal exploded publicly. Damien was formally charged with financial crimes, conspiracy and evidence tampering. Investigators reopened questions surrounding my father's death. The company collapsed under audits and lawsuits. Clients pulled out. Friends disappeared. And the video from the restaurant, especially Aunt Celeste calling me the mistake, spread everywhere online. People recognized her in public afterward, not as some respected socialite, as the woman who mocked her own niece while hiding the truth about her brother's death. But the biggest change happened quietly. Alone. 3 months later, Vivian took me to visit my father's grave. A real grave. Not the vague story I'd been fed growing up. We stood there together, while cold wind moved through the cemetery trees. Vivian handed me a small box. Inside were photographs, letters, birthday cards he'd written me but never got to send. I opened one carefully. Happy 10th birthday, Ness. No matter what anyone says, never doubt that I love you. I cried harder than I had at the restaurant. Because grief is strange when you finally meet the truth years late. You mourn the person, but you also mourn the years stolen from them. The years stolen from you. Vivian eventually told me my father had secretly set aside money for my future before everything collapsed. Enough for school. Enough for a fresh start. 6 months later, I started nursing classes. I moved into a small apartment across town. Quiet. Peaceful. No screaming. No mockery. No being introduced as the family embarrassment. One evening my phone rang while I was studying. My mother. I answered after the 4th ring. She cried almost immediately. I should have protected you. I closed my eyes. 27 years late. You protected the people who hurt us, I said softly. She didn't argue. Because she couldn't. After we hung up, I sat alone for a while in the silence of my apartment. Then I walked over to the bookshelf beside my desk. The silver pendant my father gave me sat beside a framed photograph Vivian had recovered. Him holding me as a baby. Both of us smiling. I touched the edge of the frame gently. All my life I thought I was the family's mistake. But the truth was so much worse for them. I wasn't the mistake. I was the evidence. And that's why they spent years trying to make me disappear.